What's up guys, Sean here, and today we're going to talk about the Australian fires, and more accurately, the response to the Australian fires. So I'm going to start today's proceedings, this video, with a little bit of a secret, and by secret, I mean thing that I mentioned in a previous video, but I now think that that video is way too old for some of you new people to remember that video and that thing that I said, so I'm going to say it again here, like it's new. And that non-secret is my least favorite thing about politics and my least favorite thing about the internet, which is people who have an unearned sense of moral superiority. And where you tend to see this unearned sense of moral superiority, probably more than any other group of people or group of activists across the country and across the world, are with environmental activists. And by the way, that's not just me saying it, that environmentalists are among the most likely to have an unearned sense of moral superiority. They've actually done studies on this, and it turns out that people who consider themselves more environmentally conscious are more likely to cheat, are more likely to steal, are more likely to do other morally depraved behaviors because they believe that their morality on the climate compensates and gives them license to do those behaviors. They literally believe that the fact that they do more green stuff makes them better than you.
Am I saying that I'm better than you? I guess I'm going a little further than you are. Yeah, I'm better than you, okay? Much better than you. You are garbage.
You're garbage. And then that gives them license to do terrible things that we would all consider unethical in our society. So if you hear somebody virtue signaling about how they buy only environmentally sustainable products, then watch your wallet, because that person is significantly more likely to rob you and think that they are entitled to rob you. Which makes sense because that person is significantly more likely to vote for politicians that will rob you and feel like they're entitled to rob you. So while there is definitely a crisis going on in Australia with the brush fires, a crisis that has claimed the lives of a lot of people, a crisis that has caused the damage or destruction of nearly 2,000 homes and the deaths of countless animals, and I encourage you to support the relief effort from that fire crisis, I'm not going to be talking about that today. Today what I'm going to be talking about is how environmentalists are using this crisis to achieve a political goal, and I'm going to show you how in reality these very same environmentalists are actually guilty of exacerbating the problem, and Australia has known that these environmentalists have been exacerbating the problem of wildfires for at least 20 years.
Am I saying that I'm better than you? I guess I'm going a little further than you are. Yeah, I'm better than you, okay? Much better than you. You are garbage.
You're garbage! Now, as to be expected, when the wildfire problem first started in Australia, the environmentalists jumped on this and immediately started blaming the Prime Minister of Australia and climate change, because we all know global warming's here, and that's exactly what's causing these wildfires, even though we also say out of the other side of our mouth that you can't blame individual events on global warming. This one definitely due to global warming and definitely due to the inaction of Australia's current Prime Minister. Now this is said because Australia's current Prime Minister, who took office in August of 2018, isn't really warm to climate change. He doesn't really put it as a top priority for his administration, which honestly makes a lot of sense because even if Australia cut their carbon emissions to zero, assuming everything else stayed the same or stayed on the same trajectory, that would only lower global temperatures by 0.05 or 0.5 degrees in the next 50 to 100 years. That's not really a big impact. It actually makes a lot more sense for a nation like Australia to ignore climate change, not destroy their economy, and wait for innovations from larger powers that are also larger carbon producers. If I'm an Australian politician, the decision isn't even difficult. I could tank my economy, ruin the lives of my citizens for no discernible impact on the problem, or I can have a good economy and prepare for the effects of the problem and try to mitigate them with the wealth that my nation's creating, because regardless of what I do, the large bulk of the problem is going to happen anyway if the climate change forecasters are to be believed. You see, that's called a rational decision based on an objective cost-benefit analysis. But of course, the greenies don't want that. They want to virtue signal on you.
Am I saying that I'm better than you? I guess I'm going a little further than you are. Yeah, I'm
better than you, okay? Much better than you. You are garbage.
You're garbage.
So they are condemning the Australian Prime Minister because in times of crisis, what really matters is whose fault it is, not how to solve the crisis. And the other thing that really annoys me about these environmentalists is that they are a significantly higher contributing factor to the wildfire problem in Australia than climate change is. Now, we have a chart here, and what you can see in this chart is rainfall rates in Australia over the last 120 years, give or take a couple years. And you can see in the chart that the last 3 years in Australia have been a particularly dry season, but not an unusually dry season. In fact, when you take this chart as a whole, what you find is that the last 60 years of Australia, all the way back to 1960, are actually far more wet than the previous 60 years. So Australia overall, on the whole, isn't experiencing less moisture, less rain. The trend clearly shows that Australia is getting more moisture, they're getting more rainfall, and that's happening while carbon dioxide is increasing in the atmosphere, because pre-1960 carbon dioxide levels are significantly lower than post-1960 carbon dioxide levels. Now, this isn't to say that climate change isn't impacting this, because climate change is climate change. That's why they switched the term from climate change to global warming. But the impact should be mitigating the fires, not expanding them. So what's actually expanding the potential for fires in Australia? And the answer to that question, which shouldn't be surprising to anybody who watched the beginning of this video, is in fact environmentalists. Because like in California and in other places across the world, there's been a move by environmentalists against fire mitigation techniques and controlled burns for environmental reasons. They believe that they kill too many birds, too many animals. These things are not good for the environment for whatever reason. Now, due to the fact that they don't do the controlled burns and protests stop the controlled burns from happening, there's a lot more fuel around to feed these wildfires, and that's why we're seeing wildfires increase exponentially. And this isn't a new problem in Australia. In 2002, a fireman named Liam Sheehan, which sounds like a made-up name that I must be mispronouncing, was fined $50,000 initially and paid another $50,000 for clearing trees in his area in order to make a fire break in order to protect his own home. Now, the reason Australia levied such a heavy fine against this fireman is because in Australia, due to their global warming regulations and red tape, it's incredibly difficult to cut down trees because trees are considered CO2 offsets. Now, despite the fact that he had to pay a $100,000 fine to appease the environmentalists in Australia, Liam ended up being vindicated in the end, because in 2009, Australia experienced significant brush fires across their nation, and Liam's entire town ended up burning down due to these brush fires. Well, the entire town burned down except for his home because he had the fire break that he built. And that's what the real issue is here. Environmentalists preventing fire management techniques from occurring, which increases the amount of fuels for these brush fires and makes these brush fires significantly worse when they do occur. And that's not me saying that. That's directly from a report from a scientist in 2015 warning the Australian government that they need to double, if not triple, fire management techniques because they're setting up the nation for a disastrous brush fire. According to David Pakman, and no, I don't mean that David Pakman, I mean an actual smart and qualified David Pakman, Victoria's, quote, failed fire management policy is an increasing threat to human life, water supplies, property, and the forest environment. He argued that unless the annual fuel reduction burning target, currently at a minimum of 5% of public land, isn't doubled or preferably tripled, a massive brush fire disaster will occur. The forest and alpine environment will decay and be damaged possibly beyond repair. Homes and people will be incinerated. And by the way, that's not an outlier warning. The government of Australia has been receiving these warnings from scientists who are experts in fire mitigation for decades. They got these warnings both before and after the 2009 fires. They've been getting these warnings for 20 to 30 years. But environmentalists that are against any kind of sensible environmental policy because it looks scary have been protesting controlled burns and any kind of fire mitigation as human meddling against the environment. Well, look at your environment now. It's on fire. Now, while that's annoying and insanely counterproductive, it actually gets worse than that, because the Australian broadcasting company, ABC, but not owned by Disney, which has a reputation of being extremely left-wing as a news organization, is actually going back on their Facebook page and into their archives and deleting articles from their Facebook pages and from their archives. And what's in these articles that the Australian Broadcasting Company doesn't want you to see? Glowing coverage of protests against controlled burns, including one from this year where they actually stopped the controlled burn in a zone where, guess what? It's now on fire. In conclusion, does climate change play a role in the brushfire crisis in Australia? Honestly, I have no clue. It could be exacerbating it, it could be mitigating it, I really don't know. But what I do know is this: idiocy, incompetence, malice, and the Dunning-Kruger effect are playing a much bigger role in the crisis that Australia is currently experiencing. The environmentalists that protest fire management techniques like controlled burns are completely incompetent. The fact that 87% of these fires started due to man-made reasons, whether that's accidental or due to arson, is a combination of idiocy and malice. And then there's the left-wing media going full Dunning-Kruger, whether that's in articles, whether that's online, whether that's on television, telling us first about how the protesters that are against fire mitigation are great people who care about the environment, and now, when the consequences of those actions are coming to fruition, blaming climate change. Anyway, that's all I really have for you guys today. Let me know what you think about this down in the comments below. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can support the channel using all the support links in the description box. You can follow me on other social medias with the links in the description box. This has been me talking about the actual causes of the Australian wildfires. Till next time.